This week on Diabetes Connections, pregnancy with type 1 requires strict management, but the tools designed to help keep a tight time and range aren't designed or approved for pregnancy. We're talking about the T1D Pregnancy Study, a groundbreaking effort to close the gap and include pregnant women in research. We're talking about who can be in the study, how it works, what they're looking for, and what it could mean for the future of diabetes care during those 9 months and beyond. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. I am always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. I'm your host, Stacey Sims. And if you are listening as this goes live, Tuesday, July 29th, I am taking part in a diatribe musing. This is one of their really cool panel discussions. I'm thrilled to be part of this. It takes place later today. It is 1:45 p.m. Pacific time, and that is, of course, 4:45 Eastern time. This is part of a series exploring how earlier screening to detect type 1 diabetes can change lives and what it means for the community, for healthcare providers, what they call the whole ecosystem of diabetes. I'm so excited to be part of this panel, certainly not as an expert, but as a layperson with family members who live with type 1. You know, my son was diagnosed at age 2 back in 2006, but you may not know that his cousin, who is a couple of years older, was diagnosed a couple of years later. And those two kids so far are the only people with type 1 that we know of in my entire family. I've been screened. I haven't had my daughter screened. My husband hasn't been screened. So we're going to talk about why, the feelings behind it, and a whole lot more on that panel, and that is tonight. On the podcast this week, we're talking about type 1 and pregnancy, and we have done episodes about this before, mostly about how to manage, but it is amazing to me how much little actual research there is into type 1 and pregnancy, and because there isn't a lot of research, there hasn't been a lot of technology approved specifically for T1D pregnancies. So now the folks at the Jaeb Center for Health Research, along with leading diabetes experts from around the country, are opening up an observational study to evaluate AID systems in pregnancy with type 1, and they are currently recruiting. You need to be pregnant, you need to be living with type 1, and you need to use a CGM. This study just started recruiting, and they expect to recruit for about a year. July 2026, maybe beyond, we will keep you posted. But if you are early in your pregnancy with type 1, if you're thinking about it, if you know somebody thinking about it, please tell them about this. We're going to go through all of the details here. My guests are the study chair, endocrinologist Camille Powe. She is an associate professor at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. And I'm talking to Carrie Matuzsan. She's a patient advisor. She lives with type 1, and Carrie had twins in 2020. Our conversation and what this study is all about right after this. One of the things we love the most about the Dexcom G6 is that it helped Benny become more independent, but maybe not in the way you're thinking. Remote monitoring using the Dexcom Share and Follow let us be more confident letting him do more away from home with friends or at camp. But just the design change of G6 meant Benny could use one hand to insert the sensor. He was 14. He didn't want our help anymore. It was perfect timing. Dexcom G7 is even more simple to use and gives effortless diabetes management that fits into your lifestyle without the disruptions. Ease of use helps everybody, and I'm grateful the Dexcom product designers kept that in mind with G7. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Dr. Powe, Carrie, welcome to Diabetes Connections. It's great to talk to you. I'm excited to get this information out. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's happy to be here. Thank you.
You got it. Let's start. What is this study all about? Dr. Powe, why don't you start?
Yeah. So again, thank you for having me today and for having us and our team. I'm really excited to talk to you about a study called T1D Pregnancy in Me. The big problem that we're trying to address with T1D Pregnancy in Me is that we have these amazing new advancing diabetes technology like continuous glucose monitoring, CGM, and automated insulin delivery, AID, but clinical research studies at large, including the ones that prove that these technologies work, excluded pregnant women, which is really the default for medical research. And I think that's often done with good intentions, but the unintended consequences are that the technologies aren't designed for pregnancy. And specifically in type 1 diabetes and pregnancy, the blood sugar goals and management are so much more intense than outside of pregnancy. And when we exclude pregnant women from studies, we don't know how to use the technologies optimally at a time that people need them the most. And that's in part because the technologies weren't designed for pregnancy, and in part because we don't have that knowledge base on how to use them best. And so T1D Pregnancy and Me is an opportunity for us to partner with the diabetes community, people living with T1D who are pregnant, to fill those knowledge gaps.
Okay, before we go any further, tell me a little bit about you. Why don't you start, Dr. Powe? Just tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm an endocrinologist. I'm passionate and I specialize in diabetes and pregnancy. I work at Mass General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, where I co direct our diabetes and pregnancy program with our maternal fetal medicine colleagues. And I'm really passionate about making sure that we get the diabetes advances in technology to pregnant and lactating people. And so a lot of what I spend my time doing is doing clinical research to try to make that happen.
Awesome. Carrie, jump in. Let's talk about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing
Sure.
in your role here.
Sure. I'm here to help out as part of the Breakthrough T1D Participant Advisory Council and just to provide any insight as someone who has type 1 diabetes and has been pregnant in the past. I've had type 1 for 22 years now, and I had a successful twin pregnancy from 2019. They were born early 2020. It was a terrifying time in my life because I was so scared that I was going to
Yeah.
ruin these children with the blood
Oh,
sugars, but I managed to get through it professionally. I'm a medical social worker and diabetes educator, so I spent a good chunk of my life making sure that I knew everything I needed to be able to have kids, and if the kids that would be healthy, and if anything went wrong, it wouldn't be because of my blood sugars. That was my goal.
yeah. Yeah. Wow. I have to ask, though, Breakthrough T1D Advisory Panel, what is that for people who are not familiar?
It's a voluntary panel that they create of people who are interested in supporting research studies across all areas of T1D. And it's a very cool group of people that have a lot of experience either being part of different studies or have backgrounds in research. And they propose, like, hey, this team needs some support. And they give just a brief overview and some qualifications. Like for this one, the qualification was having type 1 and being pregnant at some point in your life.
So
And
it's kind of different for different
yeah,
studies.
yeah.
It's not like one panel that's looking over
Yeah,
everything.
there's a lot of people there. I went to a group that had everybody in it, and it was this massive Zoom room with
Okay.
such interesting background. But yeah, they put out requests for these with the eligibility, and I was lucky enough to be selected
Very cool.
by the group so that I could help out with it. But it's been a really cool experience seeing, as I did research in grad school, so now it's interesting to be on the other side of it.
And Carrie, you said you're lucky to be selected, but we're really lucky to have you as an advisor to the study. So thank you.
I don't think you understand, like, how fast these slots are gone. I think I happened to be checking my email when the email went out, and I responded right away, like, "Hey, I'm interested in this," because other times I have been maybe 5 minutes late to an email and it's already gone.
Wow. Okay. We're going to talk about the study, obviously. But one of the things, Dr. Poise, that you said that really caught my attention was that pregnancy is generally excluded from studies. Because it seems to me this should be a very short conversation. AID systems are great for people in pregnancy, the end. But it's not that simple, obviously. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why I mean, I assume it's for danger or for safety.
Yeah. So, in general, historically, when you think about clinical and medical research as a whole, it hasn't always included women, first of all. And secondly, as different events happened in the past when we didn't really understand how to safely do research in pregnancy, there were created a lot of regulations that make it harder to include pregnant people in studies. And so that's really still the default for medical research most of the time. The exclusion criteria, meaning the criteria that keep you from being in a study, say you can't be pregnant. As a result, we have a lot of medical research that's done in this country, but pregnant individuals are like a very small part of that. And sort of in diabetes and diabetes tech, it's not different from the general
Wow.
clinical research endeavor. But we know, of course, that type 1 diabetes and pregnancy is such an intense time in people's lives. I've heard people say, this is the most challenging thing I've ever done to try to meet these pregnancy blood sugar targets. And that's some of the time where we know that these technologies can be most helpful. Even though we know that, sort of the default of excluding pregnant people from clinical research has still happened. And I think that's something I'm trying to change actively because it's really a shame if we can't get these technologies working when people need them the most and when it's so critical to be
Yeah.
able to do that intensive management of type 1.
What do you think has changed the most in pregnancy and T1D in the last 10 years? I'm thinking about obviously we have now CGM, AID systems, some faster insulins, different systems, different pumps are available now. Anything that really stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think CGM is a huge change for type 1 diabetes and pregnancy. Just from historical perspective, they used to tell people with type 1 diabetes not to get pregnant, that it was too dangerous. Before insulin was available and even for some time after, the maternal and fetal mortality from type 1 diabetes and pregnancy was huge. And so we've in the last 104 years since insulin was made available, we've come a huge way in that I have tons of patients every year with type 1 diabetes having healthy babies and healthy pregnancies. But I think with CGM, it really gives us so many more insights to that blood sugar. And there have been studies like the concept trial, which was done in the UK, which have shown that using CGM during pregnancy not only improves blood sugar, but it also reduces the risk of complication for the baby. And so I think that's been a real revolution. The issue is our guidelines haven't quite caught up to that technology. So know using continuous glucose monitoring is beneficial, but in large part, we're still trying to fit old pregnancy standards that we know have dramatically improved outcomes and health in type 1 diabetes and pregnancy. We're trying to take those old targets from finger sticks and superimpose them on CGM. And the
Wow.
CGM data is very different. And we actually don't know. We know some things, but we don't know at this point whether we can abandon those old targets that made pregnancy with type 1 diabetes possible for new CGM based targets. So part of what this study is going to do is going to collect a massive amount of CGM data from people living with type 1 diabetes and pregnancy and be able to answer some of those fundamental questions that we really need to take optimal care of diabetes and pregnancy.
What questions need to be answered? Is it about time and range versus A1C? Is it about lowering the threshold? What is it?
Yeah, I'll give you some examples, and there's so many, I can actually think of a lot of them. But one of them is AID, we know it improves outcomes, automated insulin delivery improves outcomes in people with diabetes generally and people with type 1. The systems are designed to target goals that are higher than the pregnancy goal.
Hmm.
Okay, every system that's commercially available today, there's a new one coming out that has a lower target, but every system that I can prescribe today and have my patient get targets a higher glucose than the pregnancy glucose. So what are people supposed to do with that? We know these systems are beneficial, but they're actually pushing the glucose higher than we want it during pregnancy. So one question is what do we do? Because what people are doing is they're doing sort of hacks. They're called hacks, but the proper name is assistive techniques. They're doing assistive techniques with the commercially available devices to try to meet the pregnancy goals. And there's not really any large scale studies about that. There's not a broad knowledge base. I think individual people have knowledge about this subject. People who take care of a lot of diabetes and pregnancy, people with diabetes who've lived through multiple pregnancies have some of that knowledge base, but we don't know which of those techniques work best. And why are we having to do this? Because I think the technology, the computational and the technological advances are there where these systems actually could be designed to reach pregnancy goals. But again, that exclusion of pregnant individuals from clinical research means that those technologies aren't available, they're not FDA cleared, et cetera. I think that's one fundamental question we're trying to look at in this study. In addition, you asked about the targets. I'll just give you one specific example of the target. So in the concept study, that big study of continuous glucose monitoring, they targeted a glucose between 63 and 140. And that's become the standard in terms of what our target range is for pregnancy with type 1. Well, there's a traditional pregnancy target. Again, these are the targets that people started using that have made pregnancy and type 1 diabetes possible. But one of them is fasting glucose less than 95. So what if you have 80% time in the pregnancy rate, which is amazing and very difficult to achieve?
Yeah.
What if you have 85% time in the 80% time in the pregnancy target range, but your fasting glucose is 105, 110? You're not meeting that pregnancy fasting target. Does that matter? We actually don't know the answer to that question.
That's amazing. Carrie, you're kind of nodding your head there. And when you said, like, that's amazing, you talked about your pregnancy in 2019, when there was less information and there was only one AID system approved. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you had during your pregnancy? Right back to our conversation. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod.
Did you hear the pod drop?
Did you know all the sounds used to make that song come from a site change with the Omnipod 5 automated insulin delivery system? Pretty cool, huh? With Omnipod 5, pump site changes are simple. The pod lasts up to 3 days, 72 hours, and to change it, you just fill up the pod with insulin, place it on your body, tap a few buttons in the Omnipod 5 app, and you're ready to go. There's no tubing to prime like with traditional insulin pumps, and it's virtually pain-free. So you never have to see or handle the insertion needle. Want to try Omnipod 5 for yourself? Request a free Omnipod 5 starter kit today by visiting omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Terms and conditions apply. Eligibility may vary.
Sure. So in 2019, at that point, I had been using Dexcom for 9 years throughout the variations of Dexcoms. Back then, it was the G6, and I loved it. And then I had the Tandem X2, which only had the basal IQ on it back in 2019. So that I know it was not approved for pregnancy. And when I went to, I think, my first maternal fetal medicine appointment where I had this wonderful dedicated endo team with that office, I adored them. They did have to say, it's recommended to turn this off because it's not approved for pregnancy.
Oh boy.
And it was clear it just needed to be documented that I was told that. And I said, great. And I ignored it and I kept it on. My team knew I was going to do that. Because that, I think, got me through the first trimester because I got the out of nowhere lows during my entire first trimester. And having the basal IQ specifically, I think, allowed me to not just have to eat that entire trimester and try to recover from lows. So I was able to live, as lovely of a life with nausea that I could for that trimester, but at least it kept me from, hanging out in the kitchen for that entire trimester. So I very much enjoyed the basal IQ, and then I just had to put my mental energy into preventing blood sugar from going too high, which I think really helped, even though I know I wasn't supposed to do it, and I did not care.
Carrie, what do you hope comes out of this study?
I would love for access to technology and, like you were mentioning, as far as that ability to potentially adjust the target value so that more people can get out of it. Because I've seen so my kids were months old when I was able to get onto the control IQ. And that was life-changing for me because I was postpartum, not sleeping, freshly entering the pandemic with 2 infants, with infant twins. So having to not put that much mental energy into managing both the highs and the lows was life-changing for me. And I know how much easier pregnancy would have been if I had access to the ability to control both the top and the bottom numbers.
Dr. Powe, can you talk a little bit about, I'm not quite sure how to put this, so I'll just kind of feel my way through it. This audience is really well educated. And a lot of these people are already, like Carrie, going to their doctors and saying, I know you can't prescribe this, but here's what I'm doing. DIY this or off label that. So, we've got it going on. But it seems like from that perspective, it isn't really that hard, right? I mean, it's very hard to get the blood sugar numbers in range. I don't want to anybody think that I'm saying that part's easy, but knowing what to do and knowing how to use the system to try to get there isn't the hard part for my audience mostly. But what you're talking about here is the vast majority of people with diabetes who have no idea that 63 to 140, that's
Sounds crazy if
bananas.
you're not pregnant, doesn't it?
Woo! I mean, even if you are, it is really, really difficult. So I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me like without this kind of study, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you can't get those approvals, you can't get the education, you can't get the insurance coverage. Is that kind of am I sounding right here?
Well, I think a lot of what you said is spot on, right? So there are people with type 1 diabetes, your audience, super savvy with all of these technologies, maybe doing DIY, automated insulin delivery, etc. Really know how to achieve very, very tight glucose. But that's not everybody. And I think even for those people that are very well educated about diabetes and they are absolutely experts in type 1, living with it 24/7, 365, as everyone with type 1 does, pregnancy might be a new experience for them.
Mm.
And they come to their doctor, to medical professionals, expecting support and education around that. And if the medical community doesn't understand how to use these technologies, even that very savvy person, expert with type 1 diabetes, expert in tech, is going to face challenges, especially if they haven't been pregnant before. And I've heard of people sort of not having that supportive, collaborative relationship with their doctor during their pregnancies because of some of these issues and these knowledge gaps. And so I think if the type 1 diabetes community can come together, partner with us, partner with researchers, and those that have a lot of expertise and the lived experience can share their experience with the study. And then we also get representation in our study of all people with type 1 diabetes. We can actually figure out like best practices for using these technologies. What's the best thing to do? When do you use the automated features? When might you have to switch to manual mode temporarily? And so I think that's really what this study is about, sort of all putting our heads together, whether you're a researcher or a person living with type 1, whether you've had 3 pregnancies or this is your first one, and generating that knowledge base so that we can make this experience better because it is a challenging experience, pregnancy with type 1 diabetes, and we have the technologies to make it better.
So who are you looking for? Who can be in this study?
In order to be in the study, you have to have type 1 diabetes. You have to be pregnant with 1 baby. That's just because we don't have enough twin pregnancies, we think, to make special conclusions for that. So for this study, sorry, Carrie, you have to be pregnant with 1 baby. You have to be less than 15 weeks pregnant because we want data across the whole pregnancy. So we don't want to just catch you at the end. We want to catch you at the beginning and go on this journey with you through pregnancy. So that's first trimester or a little bit after into second trimester. And then you have to live in the United States. That includes Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, actually. There are a few other specific exclusion criteria, but they're rare. So
So
type 1, pregnant with 1 baby, early in pregnancy, United States, and then you have to be planning to use CGM. But I would encourage you, if you're not using CGM and you're pregnant with type 1, if you're not using CGM and you have type 1, I encourage you to use it, but especially when you're pregnant. So get on that CGM and join our study.
couple of quick questions. Can people with LADA join? Is it just strictly type 1?
LADA, so LADA is eligible. So I consider LADA to be a form of type 1, if it's autoimmune. So that would a person with LADA would be eligible. We all know there's sort of like atypical cases of diabetes. We could review those on a case by case basis. But basically, if you had type 1 or autoimmune diabetes, you're eligible. You have to be on multiple daily injections of insulin or using an insulin pump or an automated insulin delivery system. So you don't have to be using automated insulin delivery to be in the study. In fact, if you're using injections, we want you in the study. We want to see everything that people are doing. But yes, all sort of type 1 autoimmune diabetes is eligible.
And 15 weeks pregnant. So how long are you recruiting? Because, somebody might not be 15 weeks pregnant today, but they
Yes,
might be in 2 months or
we
my
expect
my timeline isn't right there, but maybe. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So we expect this study to be recruiting for at least the next year,
Got it.
maybe a little bit longer. If you're thinking about getting pregnant, still check out the study once you're pregnant. We'd love to have you join. Joining is really simple. You just go online and you fill out the eligibility criteria to see if you meet study criteria. You can do the study entirely online, and you can get up to $400 if you complete all parts of the study.
Carrie, I should have asked you this a little bit earlier, but what has been your role here? Are you helping advise what this looks like?
Yeah, let's see. Feel like I haven't participated as much now that recruitment is off the ground, but it was going through the wording of questions and seeing if it felt appropriate for people who have diabetes. I think being on the research side, I know what it's like just to have that second set of eyes who aren't as into it and where you can notice any errors. That was I think the biggest part, and just adding in any other ideas that might just come up thinking about the study. I kind of imagined like I was in the study or the people I know are in the study and what kind of barriers they might run into. I had a little fear that attrition could be an issue, just with how much goes into pregnancy. So I tried to imagine what those could be and give any ideas that I came up with along the way.
I mean, and looking back on your pregnancy, you mentioned you use basal IQ, which prevents lows but doesn't do anything about highs. You mentioned nausea. Looking back, I guess while I have you here, I'd love to ask, like, any advice or anything you would change?
Ooh, that was tough. I'm just gonna say it now. I'm glad it was twins because I wanted 2 kids, but I didn't wanna go through that pregnancy again. No, I would have. It just takes I really planned to have kids, so I felt I was mentally prepared for 1 baby, honestly. That was a whole shock to find out it was 2 and knowing what it was gonna do to my blood sugar. But I felt I needed to mentally prepare myself for what I was about to get into in order to keep my blood sugars where I wanted them to be. Gonna take just a moment to brag that I did achieve a 4.7 A1C, which I know no other point in life will I ever have the mental energy or desire to get down to there again, but it was important for me, and I think that preparing myself ahead of time that, like, this is probably gonna be really hard. You're gonna be looking at I forget where my Dexcom was at that point, if I had a receiver or my phone at that point, but I'll be looking at some device constantly and thinking, and I didn't get to enjoy food because I had a 45-minute pre-bolus time, and then by 3rd trimester, I had a 1-to-1 insulin to carb ratio, so the idea of eating was just not fun, but it was on my mind all the time, but since I had mentally prepared myself for that, it made it like, that end goal was more important to me than how I got there.
Wow, that's remarkable. I don't even know what to ask
Keeps
you.
falling out.
That's fine. Well,
Um,
Pregnancy is amazing, right? It changes your body in so many different ways.
it is truly ridiculous, like, just seeing where the babies were and just imagining where my organs were. It's truly amazing, like, what a woman's body can do.
oh, listen, when I had Leah, when my daughter was born, like 2 weeks later, I was like, I am a freaking superhero. Like, I can do anything now. Look what I did. And I'm walking around and I'm supposed to go back to work soon. And like, I'm a superhero.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I never felt stronger in my whole life. And, it's just an incredible thing to know what your body can do. But I don't have diabetes. So,
Yeah, we
I can't even imagine.
we definitely need a lot of credit. I think my favorite, even though it wasn't related to type 1, but when I was in the hospital, the kids were in the NICU since they were born a little on the early side, they just needed to grow, but they were healthy. When I was discharged, they gave me an insulated lunchbox to bring milk back and forth, and it had a Superman symbol, and it said, "I make milk. What's your superpower?" We need more
Yeah.
messaging like that.
Yeah, 100%. This is the largest study of its kind, most likely.
Yep.
Hopefully, will change perception. There'll be some surprises in here, perhaps. But big picture, Dr. Powe, like, what are you hoping to find out? And it doesn't have to be like, oh, well, this CGM works better than that, or MDI is better than, big picture, what are you really hoping this changes for pregnancy in type 1?
Yeah. Great question. I think that one thing that I really hope we get out of this is really learning best practices that make managing type 1 diabetes in pregnancy easier and also improve health outcomes for people with type 1 and their babies. I think that we can learn a lot from people living with type 1 going through a pregnancy. We have some multiple choice questions on the surveys, but we also have some open ended questions. Just tell us what you're doing so that we can really learn and disseminate that information broadly. We also want the companies who make these systems to take our data and make their systems better so they work better for pregnancy. And so I think if we can do that, us all working together, people with diabetes, researchers, industry, companies making the devices, and use this massive amount of data that we've never had before to really optimize our technology to use during this critical period in people's lives, it will be incredible. So that's really, really the goal here.
Yeah, I would love to see people be able to fully utilize technology. I know how I just explained my pregnancy and how much went into it. It was such a short period of time in my life that I could dedicate that much time and effort into doing this. I know if I had a second pregnancy that I would not be able to dedicate that, and I feel like I would have guilt if wasn't able to achieve the goals that I wanted just because my life was in an entirely different spot with having kids. So I would love for people to be able to achieve that intensity that I was able to achieve, but what works for their life without taking as much mental load and that they could do it for subsequent pregnancies. I would love for women
Yeah.
to have their life back while also being healthy and having as many kids as they want.
Wow. I'm curious, Dr. Poe, when a woman comes into your office and says either I'm ready to get pregnant, living with type 1, or I am pregnant, what's the first couple of things you talk about with them?
Well, the first thing I say, if they wanted to get pregnant, I say congratulations. That's the first thing I say. And then the second thing is I ask if it would be okay for me to, well, first of all, what questions do you have, right? Because people with diabetes, they usually don't go into pregnancy lightly. They've read all about it. They know a lot. So I ask them first, what questions do you have that I can answer? And then depending on what they say, I ask them if I can share with them my experience on how other people have tackled type 1 diabetes in pregnancy and what that journey's been like. And I share with them the blood sugar targets. Many times they're familiar with them, sometimes they're not. And it's a big shock because, I mean, anyone who has any familiarity with type 1 diabetes, when they hear that the pregnancy goal range is 63 to 140, that feels shocking. And so I experience that shock with them if necessary. And then sort of say, but we're here to support you to get as close to those goals as possible, recognizing that it is challenging, either much, much, much easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
So those are some of the things I share with people when they first come into my office, either thinking about pregnancy or when they're actually pregnant.
Let me ask you something about those guidelines. Someone who has a child who often is not within the guidelines of his age group or what the doctor says, or sometimes what I feel like social media is pushing me to maintain, but is perfectly healthy and happy. These are guidelines, and you want people in pregnancy to get to them. But this is not a question of your blood sugar pops up to 180 or 250 and that's it, right? I mean, can you be a little reassuring on that if someone, maybe a potential grandma is listening, or someone is like, "Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, my daughter's pregnant and her A1C is a 6.5. Are we gonna be okay?"
Yeah, absolutely. So what I will say is those are targets. They're aspirational for many. They're aspirational guidelines. We strive for the targets, but we're realistic. That's really hard to achieve.
Mm.
Some people do achieve it, but if you don't achieve it, it's not your fault you have diabetes, right? And you still deserve to have as many kids as you want, right? So you're going to have a blood sugar during 200. That's 200 in pregnancy. I'm sure even if you have an A1C, that's very low. And most of the time you're meeting the target range. Everybody has those days, right? And the key is not to panic because it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think there's so much guilt and stigma that go along with diabetes in general, but that's just like doubled, tripled, quadrupled in pregnancy because you feel this responsibility for your baby.
Yeah.
And that's probably not going to help us manage this, right? So we know the target, we know the data on those targets, but we're realistic. And there's a lot of reasons why we might need to aim for a different target or customize your care individually for you.
And before I let you go, Carrie, I have to ask, you had twins early 2020, and then the world shuts down. I know it's 5 years later, but I know what that was like with my kids, and they were teenagers. How'd you do? What'd you do?
I think I get through it through humor. Looking back, it's just a ridiculous story. So I had premature twins, and so we were told, for normal, healthy babies that that are they're full term, that they should kind of be away from germs for the first 4 weeks, and that fevers are bad. Being premature, we were told 8 weeks. So week 9 is rolling around. We're like, great, we get to go outside, we get to introduce them to people. And that was the week that lockdown started. So we went right back inside just to add to the fun of it. My husband's an emergency room doctor. He was at the end of his residency at the time. So he was doing 4 clothes changes between his last probably COVID patient until he held a baby. There was at least 2 showers in there. It was a truly ridiculous time. But I spent a lot of time with them. I was alone with them a lot.
Yeah.
So they talk nonstop now. And I think that I'm going to support all of the times that they say if you talk to babies, that they gather language a little bit faster. Because I had to talk to them because I had no one else to talk about. Let's see, I blasted through a lot of TV when they were napping.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, it was a truly crazy time in life. But let's see, we all got COVID at some point coming just from the hospital by accident. Those were actually my best blood sugars of all time. Was the week that I had COVID. And the kids had COVID when they were babies. They're doing fantastic now at 5.5.
Good. That's
But
great.
yeah, it's people will ask me about like, oh, so pregnancy wasn't affected by the pandemic, but people will ask me like, what was it like to have twins? Just as a general question. And it's just like there's always that asterisk of, by the way, I didn't have to leave the house. So that made life a lot easier, actually.
Unbelievable.
But yeah,
Wow.
not something I want to relive.
No, none of us. None of us.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Carrie, thank you so much. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me. We will put all the information about the study, and I hope you come on when it's done. I'd love to learn more about what you learned. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'd love to share all the results with the whole community. So thank you so much. And then I just also want to say thank you to the Helmsley Charitable Trust for believing in this study, for funding it. We're so lucky to be able to work with them as well as the James Center in doing this study and the PI at the James Center named Robin Gall and an incredible executive committee, other diabetes and pregnancy experts from across the country, and then people like Carrie living with type 1 diabetes who are the true experts and are helping make the study a success. So please join us in T1D Pregnancy and Me. We'd love to have you partner with us in the study.
More information about the study, head on over to diabetes-connections.com and click on this episode's homepage. They are recruiting, as we said, for about a year, maybe a little bit more. So bookmark this episode, bookmark that link if this is something you are thinking about. Do me a favor and share this episode with somebody in the community that you think would be interested. I would really appreciate that. All right, thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.